Shaun Haney here with RealAgriculture.com, Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM, and we're at Crops Convention in Edmonton, Alberta. Joined right now by Todd Hirsch of Todd Hirsch Consulting. Todd, it's great to chat with you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, hey, it's been a while. We were trying to talk, maybe probably 10 years ago we met each other when you were speaking at Farm Tech here in Edmonton.
That's right, yeah.
A lot has changed in that time period. We don't need to do a full history lesson, but you just got off the stage giving a keynote address to the delegates. I guess from an economic standpoint, where does Canada sit here at this moment in time with dealing with the new tariffs and the threat of potentially, quite frankly, even more?
Right. Canada's not in a good spot. There's not really any way to sugarcoat this. If these 25% tariffs and the 10% on energy, if these are here to stay, this is going to be a very, very difficult year economically for Canada. But, the threat of tariffs can sometimes be worse than the actual tariff itself because it creates this environment of uncertainty. And if there's any situation that businesses, don't like to operate in, it's not knowing what the rules are going to be. So while the tariffs themselves, if these 25% tariffs stay in place, very difficult year for Canada, for agriculture. We are trade dependent. I think it will stimulate a lot of creative thinking about what do we do about this? How can we diversify our trading partners? All of that, though, takes time. It's a worthwhile endeavor, but it takes time. But there's no way around this. The 25% tariff is going to be tough.
So economically, what's our leverage point? Is it Canada really needs inflation in the U.S. to get higher so the consumer feels some pain eventually?
Well, that would help, and we hate to think about our best case scenario is hardship for our American neighbors, because I think most Canadians, we know Americans. They're our friends, they're our relatives, they're our neighbors, and we don't want hardship on them. But we do need in some way to get the president's attention. If that's through higher inflation on American consumers or maybe stock market volatility, something that would get the president's attention to say, hey, maybe these tariffs, are not such a good idea after all.
Yeah. So Canada's retaliated. We're recording this Wednesday morning of this week, and the Prime Minister said this morning that unless the U.S. backs completely off of their tariff amounts, Canada's leaving the retaliatory measures in place. From an economic standpoint, are the retaliatory tariffs on Canada's part a good idea?
Not economically. To be honest, I always joke there's an economic answer and there's a political answer, and the politics is always going to win. Economically, these retaliatory tariffs are going to hurt Canadian consumers far more than they're going to necessarily inflict damage on Americans. We do want to get their attention in that way, but it is creating a hardship on Canadian consumers. So economically, the very best way to deal with this would be almost to just do nothing and ignore it. Politically, that is an impossible answer. It is not possible at this point for our Prime Minister or any Premier to say, we're just going to pretend this isn't happening. Canadians want some action. They want some justice. They want to feel like we are, standing up for ourselves. So that's I think, the rationale politically with the retaliatory tariffs.
So economically, leaving the politics aside, economically, what would be a good response?
Economically, the very best response would be do nothing, work hard to reduce interprovincial trade, which I think is maybe one of the silver linings that is coming out of this crisis, is that in Canada, our system of interprovincial trade has been embarrassingly inadequate. So if we can address that, I think also work hard to diversify our trading partners. There's a lot of other markets around the world. Sure, they're tougher to get to. There's transportation costs, there's time zones and culture and everything else. But I think that's what we need. Economically, that would be our best course of action.
Is there examples of countries you're thinking about there?
Well, when I think about the United States, relatively the same size as the European Union in terms of population and economy. And also Japan. We tend to forget about Japan, a massive G7 country that seems to be completely forgotten right now in geopolitics, but a liberal democracy that holds a lot of the similar rights that Canada has. Why we're not working really hard to increase trade with them. Smaller countries like Australia, New Zealand, there's lots of other markets. Now, collectively, we'd have to be exporting to all of them to make up for the loss of the U.S. But I think it's possible and worth working towards.
We're definitely seeing a reshifting, a readjustment of trading lanes. It's something that Canada's going to have to kind of try to figure out how to deal with. And I think we're kind of in that moment of it's uncomfortable. And it creates a lot of uncertainty, a lot of risk. Trying to attract, are you at all concerned about trying to attract capital investment into the country at moments like this?
I am, because like I said, Canada, we're not in a great spot. We find ourselves far too dependent on trade with one single trading partner, which since the end of the Second World War, or even long before that, has been a reliable trading partner. And now that has all shifted on us. So we're not in a good spot. And I do worry about, how does Canada continue to attract capital investment in an environment where there's a lot of uncertainty. But again, I think there's possible ways around it. We just have to show that we're serious about interprovincial trade, reducing those barriers, and also diversifying our trade.
I've read a lot of Scott Linscomb from the Pew Institute stuff, and one of the things that he has mentioned, who's very anti-tariff, like he hates tariffs, but one of the things that he has mentioned is that there's a significant difference between a 25% tariff and a 10% tariff. A 10% tariff, that's like a currency fluctuation. That's, cost of goods went up. That is substantially different than a 25. Would you agree with that?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, it's 2.5 times worse than a 10% tariff, which, by the way, is what the president campaigned on, a universal 10% tariff. If that was what he imposed, you could at least give him credit for being consistent with what he campaigned on. But that is not what he campaigned on. He did not campaign on a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico. So yeah, absolutely, those tariffs far worse than a 10%. But in my mind, any tariff is too much.
You think the Bank of Canada's got some cutting to do this year?
I do, simply because I think they will be responding very quickly to a softening Canadian economy. Every day these tariffs stay in place, and we have no idea, is this going to be 4 days or 4 years? But every day these tariffs stay in place is weakening for the Canadian economy. So I do think the Bank of Canada will be prepared to offer more cuts in its coming meetings.
Well, Todd, really appreciate you joining us. Hopefully it doesn't take another 10 years for us to chat. So all the best to you. Enjoy the rest of the Crops Convention.
Thanks very much, Sean. Thanks for having me.